All right, and we are live. So let's see here. Pull up the participants.
One attendee.
Yes, awesome. So we've got some people coming in right now. We'll wait just a couple of minutes for everybody else to start coming in. Got a couple other people. Awesome. So for those of you that are joining us live right now, hello, welcome to the MSU Museum, to our first virtual live Science on a Sphere show. We're very excited to have you. For everybody else that's just tuning in a couple of minutes, they can miss this bit, but that's all right. So my name is Nick VanAcker. I'm the Science on a Sphere coordinator here at the museum, and presenting with me today is Alina. Alina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, I am Alina. I am a student at Michigan State, and I am our Science on a Sphere presenter.
Yeah, so usually Alina and I do these programs in person, but obviously we're social distancing, so we are in separate places right now doing the program together. Today's program is called Climate Clues, so it's going to be all about climate change. And so over the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk all about all sorts of different aspects of climate change. We have some cool demonstrations and different objects to show you, some cool data sets we'll pull up on the sphere. Then at the end, we'll do a quick craft about reusability. And then if you guys have any questions or if you have any data sets that you want me to pull up on the sphere, then we kind of open it up for requests at the end. So just a little bit about SOS, or about Zoom webinars, if you guys haven't used those before. There are a couple of key features that you can use throughout the program. If you have any questions, you can either leave them in the chat or in the Q&A section down at the bottom. Alina's going to be moderating those, and then she'll be relaying all of your questions and comments to me. So anything that you guys are feeling throughout the presentation, feel free to just throw it in the chat, and we'll be happy to read that and talk with you about it. And then there's also going to be some questions that will pop up throughout the presentation, little opportunities for interaction. So I might have a data set and ask a question about it. Alina will pull up the question on your screen, and then you'll be able to answer, yes, I do think this, or no, I don't think that, or whatever specific things there are about the data sets. So it should be pretty fun. Just a little bit of information about Science on a Sphere before we start the actual presentation. It's easier to tell when you're in the museum with me, but obviously you're just looking at a screen right now. Science on a Sphere is a big sphere that hangs from the ceiling of one of the museum galleries. I like to call it a big gray ball that has projectors on it. So that's basically all that it is. There's 4 projectors in the room, one in each corner. You can probably see a couple of them behind me that project all of this cool information on the sphere. So we're going to be talking about climate change today, but we can also be talking about space or animal migrations or all sorts of different cool information we're able to pull up on here. We have about 600 different data sets, we call them, we're able to pull up from all over the world. So there's lots of cool information. But today, we're going to be talking about climate change. So the first thing we'd like to talk about when we talk about climate change in our Climate Clues program is an easy one, and you guys can throw the answer to this in the chat. Everybody should know it. What planet are we looking at right now? We can wait for those answers to come in, and then Alina, you can let me know what people are saying. But hopefully everybody should be saying the answer. Is anybody tuning in yet, Alina?
Nope, not yet.
No, you guys know this. You can type it in the chat. What planet are we looking at here?
Earth. We have
yes, Earth. Perfect.
Yes.
We are looking at the Earth. We all live here. We're all familiar with it. The Earth is the 3rd planet from the sun. It's personally my favorite because I live here, so I'm biased. But the Earth is full of all sorts of really cool, complex systems. And the Earth kind of works like the human body. So just the same way that there's all sorts of systems that help the human body to function, we have the digestive system, the respiratory system, helps us breathe, helps us digest food. The Earth is covered in all sorts of different systems. And so we're going to talk about some of those systems today, how they work, and how humans have been changing them over time. So I'm going to pull up a different image. It's still going to be a picture of the Earth, but it's going to look a little bit different. So we can wait for that to pop up. And so you guys can see on your screens now, this is still the Earth, but I changed something about the ocean. You can see there's all of these beautiful colored lines all over the ocean. And so you guys can throw in the chat, what do you guys think these colored lines represent? This is a little bit tougher one than the Earth, but I think you guys can get it. So there's colored lines, you can see them kind of moving around, maybe a little bit fuzzy on your screen. Yep, I see somebody says it might represent water. That's a great question, or that's a great thought. What about water do you guys think these colored lines represent? It's a tricky one. Alina, what are people saying?
A couple people saying temperature.
Yes, exactly. So we can see that there's all these colored lines here. There's blue down at the South Pole, up at the North Pole. There's kind of red in the middle. So these colored lines are representing the temperature of the ocean going all throughout the Earth. There's some specific patterns here that you guys might be able to see as well, and I kind of mentioned that. And it's something that you'll know if you've ever swam in the ocean or just been in different parts of the world. Some of the ocean is going to be warmer, and some of the ocean is going to be colder. So hopefully another easy one for you. What parts of the ocean do you guys think are going to be colder? What color do you think represents that? Wait and see.
Blue. Everybody is saying that blue is colder.
Yes, blue is colder. So that's a common thing, right? When we're talking about temperatures, usually red represents really hot stuff, blue represents really cold stuff. And that's the same way on this illustration. So you can see that down at the South Pole around Antarctica, there's lots of blue color here, which means that the water is really, really cold. Around the equator, the water is a lot of reds and some oranges. So the water is really, really warm. And so the ocean, you'll notice, though, isn't always perfectly this way. So it's not always just red in the middle and blue down at the bottom. Sometimes red spreads all the way up a lot further than we think it would be, or a lot further south than we think it would be. And the reason for that is because this isn't just showing the temperature of the oceans, it's actually showing the temperature of ocean currents. And ocean currents kind of act like the circulatory system for the Earth. So they don't just keep all of that warmth or all that coldness in one area of the Earth. They actually spread it all the way around the Earth. So they pump heat all around the Earth, they pump nutrients all around the Earth, and they even pump living things all the way around the Earth. And so I have a model here of a human heart to kind of give you guys an idea that the human heart and the Earth are very similar to each other. They both pump things all around their bodies to change heat and nutrients all around the organism. So I'm going to change one more thing about this picture so we can see this a little bit easier.
We do have one question.
Yes, what question do you have, Alina?
Someone has asked, is that the Earth on a certain date, or today, or a bunch of days?
That is a great question. So Science on a Sphere is able to show things live in real time. And if we want to, we can check out some of those data sets at the end of the program. So we can look at like real-time weather and all sorts of different stuff. This data set is showing a particular set of days. So it's in 2007 when this data was collected, and it's going through the summer. So you might not be able to see it on your screen, but there's a little ticker down here. And so right now we're looking at what the Earth looks like in October, and then it's going to go through to November. So this actually might be a whole year. I might have just lied there. I thought it was just the summer. It's actually a whole year of 2007, how the ocean currents changed and moved. And so you'll be able to see that they're moving around in real time, how they moved in 2007. But yeah, so that's a great question. Some of them are real time, some of them are recordings, basically. And so when we look at this, we'll see that, like I was talking about, the ocean is able to pump nutrients and heat all around. And sometimes these ocean currents will pump heat and nutrients to places you might not expect them to go. So for instance, I'm going to move the sphere around so we can look up at the United Kingdom. So I'm going to rotate us around a little bit. And you'll see the United Kingdom is actually really, really high latitude. It's much higher than some people think. I'm going to zoom in here so we can see it a little bit better maybe. It's much higher than people think. And the area that the United Kingdom is in, if we look at the rest of the Earth, the water around the United Kingdom should be blue. It should be really cold. But you'll notice it's not. It's actually green. And the reason for that is because there's an ocean current that takes warm water all the way up to the United Kingdom, makes it nice and warm. The same thing happens for the Galapagos Islands down off the coast of South America. They're actually also a lot warmer than you would expect them to be because there's lots of nutrients and heat pumping there. So the ocean currents act really as the circulatory system for the Earth. So this also helps regulate all the Earth's climate and temperatures, right? Because we're able to move temperature around the Earth. It's able to be warmer some places and colder other places. So I'm going to change one more thing about this map. It's still going to be a picture of the Earth, but we're going to be looking at a different type, or a different way to look at the Earth. You'll see that this map has all sorts of lines. There's red lines, there's green lines, there's blue lines. And so another question for you guys, we've looked at some natural systems so far of how the Earth functions. Do you guys think that this is a natural system that we're looking at on the Earth or a man-made system? And you can answer in the survey that Alina just popped up for us. You can either hit natural system or man-made system.
Yeah.
Wait for the results to come in.
The results are coming in.
Awesome.
Okay. We've got almost everybody has replied. So we've got one person saying maybe it's a natural system, but most people think it's a man-made system.
Correct. Yeah, and that's exactly the right answer. So it is kind of a natural system, right? We've got the continents underneath there, but this is showing a man-made system. This data set is called human transportation, and so it shows all the transportation pathways all over the world. So we've got blue lines, we've got red lines, and we've got green lines. The blue lines represent shipping routes, so you'll see that there's all these huge blue lines going between continents across oceans. The red lines represent flight paths of airplanes, so it's showing all these different connections between major cities. And for a while when I was looking at this data set, I didn't actually realize, but there's green lines on this map too, and there's so many of them, they basically just look like the continents, but the green lines represent all of the roads all across the world. And so all of those roads are going to have cars and buses and trucks and all sorts of vehicles driving on them, right? So this human transportation map really shows you how complex of a system that humans have built. It almost looks exactly the same as the ocean currents map, right? There's these cool colored lines all over the Earth, but it shows you the impact that humans have had on the Earth. It shows you that we have built this entire huge infrastructure basically on top of other systems. And unfortunately, our huge transportation system can impact the natural systems that the Earth has. We're going to talk about that in a second. There's actually another question that Alina can pull up right now, just to get you guys kind of thinking about why this is so important. You might be thinking, well, you know, I haven't ever taken a boat all the way across the ocean, or maybe I haven't taken a flight recently. So you're feeling pretty good about the amount of fossil fuels that you've used. But there's a question here that you guys can answer about whether or not you drove, have ridden in, or had something delivered by a vehicle in the last week. And I don't have the results of it yet, but I assume I'm gonna know the answer to this. You can answer yes or no if you've driven, if you've ridden in a vehicle, or if you've had something delivered by a vehicle in the last week.
Getting a lot of yeses.
Yes, getting a lot of yeses, and I'm the same way. I drove here to work today. I've ridden in a vehicle a couple times over the last week. We've had some deliveries, even just things like mail. So that's one question. And even if you didn't answer yes to this one, there's another question that's right next to it that Alina can pull up. And that question is going to ask whether or not you've gotten groceries or whether you've used other services. And I think that you can probably access that right next to it. Yeah, if you've gotten groceries, if you've been online, or used electricity in the last week. And I assume, seeing as you're all here, the answer to that is going to be yes, you're using electricity right now. The reason that that's important is because of how these systems work and how they impact each other. So everybody uses these systems for all sorts of different things, whether it's getting to work, whether it's getting groceries. Groceries have to travel to the store somehow. Or even if it's just using electricity, electricity has to be generated somehow. And all of those are generated using fossil fuels. This is something you guys are probably familiar with. You've driven cars before, you know about fossil fuels. I have an example of a fossil fuel right here. It's a piece of coal. And fossil fuels themselves are pretty simple looking, right? They're just rocks, they're just oil. The problem comes when we burn those fossil fuels in these huge amounts to power these gigantic systems. If I were to burn that one piece of coal by itself, it's not going to do very much. But when everybody across the world burns a bunch of fossil fuels, all of the materials in the fossil fuels get released. Mostly that's carbon dioxide they get released up into the atmosphere. When they're up in the atmosphere, it ends up creating sort of a heat trapping blanket around the Earth. That's called the greenhouse effect, which you guys have probably heard about too. So I have a little Earth right here, and I've got my plastic pie tin to represent the greenhouse effect. But basically what happens is that carbon dioxide gets wrapped all around the Earth, and it ends up trapping heat inside of the Earth's atmosphere. So rather than the heat being able to bounce off the Earth and escape, it gets trapped underneath this little pie plate, bounces back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that heat ends up warming the Earth gradually over time. Now, that's where the idea of global warming comes in. We actually call it climate change, because the Earth gradually warming over time doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get warmer and warmer over time. It just means that things are going to change drastically in the climate. So if we go back to our sea surface currents, you'll see that it's really delicate balance, right? That there's hot areas, cold areas. So what do you guys think would happen if there's a bunch of heat trapped inside of the atmosphere and inside of the ocean of the Earth? What's going to happen to these sorts of systems? Are they going to stay the same, or are they going to change?
Put that in the chat. Oceans would get warmer.
Yeah, exactly. The oceans would get warmer. That's a great response. And so that's one of the many things that's going to happen, right? If the heat is being trapped in the atmosphere, getting trapped in the oceans are going to get warmer, which means it's going to disturb the systems that we have right now. The areas that are warm, the areas that are cold, aren't always going to stay warm and cold. Now, when those areas change, it's going to change all of the currents all over the Earth, because those currents are based on temperature. Warm areas go to cold areas go to warm areas. If those temperatures are changing, then the entire system of ocean currents that's pumping life and nutrients and temperature all around the Earth is going to get disturbed and change. And we can predict how that might happen, but we don't know for sure how those changes are going to end up affecting everything all over the Earth. We do know it's going to be big, and it might be bad, or will be bad. So it's important that we stop that from happening. So luckily, the second part of the program is about how we can stop that from happening. So we have a couple of different maps here that we can pull out about some alternatives to fossil fuels that we're able to use right now to try and limit our impact on the Earth. One important thing to think about too before we get to the alternative energy is looking at these systems. It seems like the best way to stop using fossil fuels would just be to cut them off completely, right? To just stop driving your car, to stop flying planes, to stop burning coal to produce energy. But the problem is these huge systems are global, right? If we were to just stop burning fossil fuels one day, the entire Earth would shut down, basically, or at least human life on Earth would shut down, because we depend so much on those fossil fuels. So using alternative energy to power these systems is really, really important. But so the first alternative energy that we're going to talk about, as I pull it up, and you guys should be able to see it, it's a bright one, so it might look a little crazy on your screen. This one is looking at wind resources. And this is a really, really cool map. So this is looking at global wind resources all over the Earth. There's a little key right here that you guys might be able to read, you might not. But basically, the darker purple that an area is on the Earth, the more wind there is in that area. And then the lighter something is, if it's almost white on the sphere, that means that there's less wind there. And so you'll notice, as we're looking around, it only maps the wind around islands and around continents, but there's a lot of wind all over the Earth that could be harnessed for wind energy, especially in areas like down here on the south of Australia, around New Zealand, and a lot on the coasts. There's a lot of wind potential that we might be able to harness to try and power these global systems. Of course, no solution is perfect. We know that about fossil fuels. It's great to produce power, not great for the environment. Wind power is really awesome. And we have an example, a picture of a windmill here. You guys have probably seen these before driving down the highway. I know I've been seeing them a lot. There's areas in Michigan that's over on the kind of like northeast part of the state, up kind of near like Saginaw area, that has a lot of windmills. Windmills are really, really cool, but of course there's problems with them. Mainly, they cost a lot of money to produce, and they are also kind of an eyesore for some people. I personally don't mind them. I think they look kind of cool, but other people don't enjoy seeing them spread out across the fields. They think that they're kind of scary, they're kind of big. So yeah, they cost a lot to produce, and some people don't like the way they look. But they are a great solution in some areas, especially areas that have really, really high wind potential. The other problem is, of course, the Earth isn't the same all the way around, so some areas aren't going to have enough wind for wind power to really make sense. So you wouldn't want to spend a bunch of money on a windmill if you're not able to actually get any energy from that windmill. So wind is one potential solution. Wind is really great, but it's not always the best solution for an area. But luckily, we do have other options as well, and this is one I'm sure you guys are familiar with, that you've probably seen before. We'll wait for the sphere to calm down for a second. This is looking at solar energy all over the Earth. And you can see that solar energy, I mean, the sun hits the Earth every day, right? It hits the entire Earth over 24 hours. And this is the same thing. The darker brown that an area is, the more solar energy it gets. And the kind of like lighter brown that it is, all the way down to red, yellow, until it gets to white, is less solar energy. So you can see most of the Earth is covered in reds and yellows, which means that we're getting a lot of energy from the sun. And there's a really interesting fact about this data set, which is that the amount of sun that hits the Earth in one day is enough to power the Earth for one whole year. If we were able to capture all of that sunlight in just one day, we could power everything on the Earth, from boats to planes to computers to electricity, every single thing that we use on the Earth for an entire year. Of course, that's not going to happen. That would mean that we'd have to cover the entire Earth in solar panels, which I like to have a place to live. I want to protect some areas of nature. I don't think we should cover the entire Earth in solar panels just to get that one day of sunlight. But if we were to do it, there's so much energy hitting the Earth that we can utilize. And so you can see there's lots of great areas, especially areas in the desert or over the ocean, that's getting a lot of sunlight that's not necessarily being captured for energy. We have an example of some solar panels here that you can see. I'm sure that you guys have seen solar panels before. They're also on a lot of different electronics too. So I have, for instance, here somewhere, just a little solar powered dinosaur. Hold that up to the camera. And you guys might have seen these on little windows. I have a UV light that we can make him go. But he's able to use the solar light. You might not want to go for me right now. But he can use the light from the sun to move. He clamps his little jaws together and he moves his little arms. So of course that's a fun toy, but solar panels can also be used for a lot of other things. You've probably seen them on calculators before, and lots of other small devices, all the way up to the huge solar panels that you might see out in the field. Solar panels are really great for capturing the sun's light, but they also have problems, right? They're very expensive to produce. Again, some people don't like the way they look. And also, they need to be kind of replaced over time. So we're getting better and better at making solar panels, but sometimes they'll degrade over time. They might need to be cleaned off. There's lots of different things that don't make them perfect, but they're a pretty good solution. And so a lot of different people have been working on ways to use solar panels as a way to produce alternative energy for the Earth. So we've got a couple of different examples here. One great way that some people have been trying to limit some of the problems with solar panels has been by working together to buy them. So solar panels are really expensive. You might not be able to buy them on your own, but you could start a community group that all buys into a solar panel together, and then everybody gets the reward from those solar panels. So this is one that happened in Massachusetts. It was an initiative called Solarize Massachusetts. You might not be able to see the graph very well, but basically it says that energy produced, the number of solar panels in Massachusetts used to be the little orange bars down at the bottom before Solarize Massachusetts, and then after Solarize Massachusetts, it basically doubled. So all the blue bars on top are showing all of the new solar panels and all the new solar energy being generated in Massachusetts based off that initiative, which is really cool. It's kind of like a community garden. People come in together for a common goal. In this case, it's to buy solar panels. There's also other options. So sometimes big organizations will work hard to try and get solar panels for the community. You might be able to see this image, you might not. It's looking a little flickery on my screen. But this is showing solar panels being installed over the Seattle Aquarium. And the Seattle Aquarium did something very similar. People could buy into the solar panels that were being put on the roof of the Seattle Aquarium, and then they were able to get some benefits back from it. So the Seattle Aquarium was able to get free energy, people were able to get free benefits. it worked really, really well. Luckily, there are also some great solar initiatives happening close to home too. So we can talk about Seattle, we can talk about Massachusetts, that's really great, but what's happening on MSU's campus. And MSU actually has a huge array of solar panels down in the south of campus that you guys might have seen if you were parked in the commuter lot before or just driven past there down near the farm south of campus. But MSU has a huge solar farm over several of their different parking lots that were just installed pretty recently. It was within the last year. Or no, it was 2017, excuse me. But they installed what they call solar carports. And so these solar carports have a couple of really great benefits. For one, they're solar panels, so it's able to generate a bunch of energy for the university. But also, a lot of people will park in these parking lots during the winter. And of course, what's the worst thing living in Michigan winter? Scraping ice off of your car, scraping snow off of your car after you've been at work all day. So the carports will actually protect the cars from snow and from rain, and acts just basically like a roof for the cars that's also generating solar energy. These are actually some of the largest solar carports in North America, and they generate between 5 and 8% of the total electricity needed for campus, which is enough to power 1,800 homes, which shows you how much power campus is using every day, but also is a really fantastic stat to look at that and say, wow. Alina, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, we have a question about, okay, 2 questions. The first is, how sunny does it have to be for solar panels to work, and can people get sun energy in Michigan in winter? And then the second is that if we had lots and lots of solar panels, would it help with the greenhouse effect because more energy would be absorbed?
Yeah, that's a couple of really, really great questions. So about solar panels in Michigan, you can use them in winter. You can get solar energy from Michigan. It's not going to be as good as some place that gets more sun, like somewhere like Arizona or maybe California, that's going to get like a lot of sun 365 days a year. But you still can get a lot of energy from the sun in Michigan. The interesting thing about it is that it's all based off of the way that you direct your solar panel. So in, say, like the desert, for instance, I don't live there, so I'm not totally sure which way you would direct your solar panel, but you would try and figure out the path of the sun, and solar companies are really great at this. You figure out the path of the sun, you look at trees on your property, and you would figure out what area and what orientation of solar panel, whether it's flat, whether it's up, whether it's turned, you know, whatever direction, what way to put that solar panel to get the most amount of sunlight. And in Michigan, you can totally do it. You just have to find the direction that's going to get the most sun. I believe it's southwest. I'm not confident on that, so don't install a solar panel based on that. But I definitely have seen people in Michigan who have solar panels actually drive past a huge field with them on my way to work every day. So people definitely put solar panels in Michigan and definitely can use them during the winter. There is some problems with snow sometimes, so you might have to brush off a solar panel, for instance. But if you think about it, this is a little off topic, but every vehicle that has ever gone to Mars uses solar panels to power itself currently. Mars is covered in huge areas of dust and sand, and they have huge sandstorms that are crazy, much bigger than we would ever have on Earth. And that means that those solar panels are going to get covered in dust and sand and get scratched up and have all sorts of problems. But the rovers on Mars are still able to function because they're able to just brush the sand off, or they're able to tilt the solar panel to get the sand off. So if they're able to survive without any human interaction from, you know, hundreds of millions of miles away, we can use solar panels in Michigan with a little bit of snow on them. It's not that big of a deal. And then what was the other question, Alina?
If we had lots and lots of solar panels, would it help with the greenhouse effect because more energy would be absorbed?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So that gets into another sort of issue with global climate change, which is how the energy from the sun is being absorbed. So actually what we want to do for the most part is reflect sun away from the earth and try and get it so it's not trapped in that greenhouse layer in the first place. Which is why you hear so much when people are talking about climate change, they talk about the ice caps. The ice caps are basically just big white areas, and white's really good at reflecting sunlight away. So rather than this energy of the earth being, or the energy of the sun being absorbed into the earth, it's reflected off. I don't know whether or not the solar panels are really, really good at reflecting most of that sunlight away. You'd think that they'd be really good at absorbing it, but That's a great question, and it's something that I'm sure scientists are looking at about whether or not that amount of solar panels would affect. Yes, Alina, do you have a thought?
There's one more question. Sorry.
Yes.
So if the ice melts, will that make the Earth even hotter?
Yes, that is a fantastic question, and that's exactly what happens. So you might think that ice melting, that's going to have problems, maybe like raising ocean levels or something like that, which will happen a little bit, but it's not the main problem. The main problem with the ice caps melting is that the sunlight isn't going to be reflected, which then will make the Earth hotter because it's revealing kind of like greener areas, which will absorb more energy from the sun. So that's the real problem. Obviously, people who care about the climate care about polar bears. We care about protecting the ice caps just because they're pretty, but mostly the ice caps eat the whole Earth. Yeah, great questions, fantastic questions. And we are almost done with this presentation too, and we're looking at the solar panels at MSU. There's one cool MSU thing that's also happening with solar technology that I'm going to pull up right now, and that is work being done by someone named Dr. Richard Lunt. So I'm going to pull up a picture of Dr. Lunt right now, and you might be able to see, we'll wait for the sphere to, again, get a little bit less bright. We can kind of rotate Dr. Lunt around so you can see him. Alina, are you able to see Dr. Lunt at all, or is it just a blue shirt?
It's just a blue shirt.
Okay, well, honestly, that's all you're really able to see in the picture anyway. He has a head in real life. He's a really wonderful guy. But Dr. Lunt has developed a really, really cool technology for solar panels, and he's made basically what are called clear solar panels. So he works in the molecular exotonics lab at MSU. We'll see if this one's a little bit better. But he works developing films that can be put all over all sorts of different devices and different flat surfaces. But one of the films that they've developed is a solar film. So Dr. Lunt and his team's idea is that you can create these clear solar panels, which are so clear you can barely see them on the screen. It basically just looks like a piece of glass. But these pieces of glass covered in this film can act the same way as a solar panel. So the problem with solar panels, right, is that we were talking about you have to orient them the right way in Michigan. You have to figure out what ways the best way is going to be. And of course, they're just big, colorful squares, basically. But so if we're able to change what solar panels are, if we're able to put them over pieces of glass, for instance, every window that you see could be a solar panel, or every skyscraper that you see, the entire side of it could be a solar panel, or even just devices in our pockets. Our smartphones could have solar panels on the screen. And so it's really fantastic if they're able to develop this project further, because it would mean that we wouldn't need to cover the entire Earth in flat solar panels. Solar panels could just be integrated into our lives as windows, as smartphone screens, as all sorts of different devices. Even they could be added to clothing or all sorts of different stuff. And so we could be powering the world without having to find a giant area to build solar panels or spend a bunch of money on solar panels, because they'd be on things that we're already using. So Dr. Lunt's work is really, really cool. He has a couple of different articles, and I think he has a TED Talk too that you guys can watch. But it's a really fantastic project if you guys want to learn more about new things developing in alternative energy. Yes, Alina.
There is one more question, and this is kind of related to what we've been talking about just now. What is being done to save the ice caps? And part of that is the solar energy part, right?
Yeah, so basically the main thing that's being done to save the ice caps is to try and limit the amount that the Earth is going to warm over time, which we do by limiting the amount of fossil fuels that we burn. So it's kind of a circular system, right? We'll end up burning fossil fuels, which release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It creates that kind of greenhouse layer, which traps the heat, which then melts the ice caps. Then the more ice caps that melt, then more heat is able to be absorbed into the Earth because there's less light being reflected, which then means that the Earth is getting warmer and warmer, which means more ice caps are melting and more ice caps are melting. So eventually we could get to the point where no matter what we try and do, the Earth is just to the point that the ice caps are going to continue melting, and it's going to be a feedback loop that we can't stop. We don't know if we're there yet. We really, really hope that we aren't there yet. But so the main thing that's being done is basically work that's stopping fossil fuels from being burned, stopping greenhouse gases from being released into the atmosphere, because that's the real cause of it. If we were to do something like put a big white blanket over the ice caps, that could work, maybe, but it would be basically putting a Band-Aid on the problem. The main problem is stopping the fossil fuels in the first place. And so if we do that, it cuts it off, yeah. There has been some cool stuff that I've seen with things like shade balls to try and stop I'm trying to phrase this in the right way. They're basically just big plastic balls that are put over like reservoirs. That's trying to stop evaporation, but I've seen some initial work about talking about if we were to create a bunch of those white balls and use those to reflect sunlight. But again, that's kind of a band-aid on the system. All you really need to do is we need to stop burning fossil fuels, and that will help the ice caps and help all the other problems that we have. So yeah, great, fantastic questions. Are there any more?
No, that's all I've got for us.
No, perfect. And so I've got my time at 10:35. So we have a quick craft planned for you guys. If you're interested, you can totally take part in this. Otherwise, you can just watch, maybe do it later. It's a very quick craft, but we're going to be talking about kind of the same things that we've been talking about with how to limit your carbon impact, how to limit the amount of fossil fuels released into the atmosphere. And we're going to do that by making reusable t-shirt bags. So you guys might be able to see on my screen right now, I have made a reusable t-shirt bag out of a t-shirt from one of the museum events, Darwin Discovery Day, which we do every February. So in your email that you initially got when you signed up for this program, you should have received the information that you needed a t-shirt and a pair of scissors. Again, if you don't have those, you could either run and go get them, or you could just watch, which is all good. But this is a really, really simple project to do. It's only going to take a couple of minutes. Like I said, all you need is a t-shirt and a pair of scissors. So I've got a new fresh t-shirt here. And it's basically just 3 steps. So the first step is going to be that we are going to cut off the sleeves. And so luckily on all t-shirts, there's a nice little seam right here that makes the sleeves. You can see the little line right there. You've all worn t-shirts before, I'm sure, so you know. But so you can just cut on the inside of that seam. So there's going to be the side that's the sleeve, the side that's the shirt. So you'll just cut on the shirt side of the seam. And you can cut off both sleeves for that. And it doesn't have to be super neat. These bags aren't necessarily going to win any fashion awards. They are pretty cool looking. A lot of people like them when I bring them to the grocery store because they don't want to have to buy reusable bags. And so this is a really great use for something that you probably already have lying around the house. T-shirts take a lot of fossil fuels to make. Mostly just because the cotton and things that they're made out of are grown in different parts of the world, and then that cotton and other materials need to be shipped, and then once those are shipped, they need to be made into a t-shirt, which is then shipped somewhere else. And so there's a lot of projects that kind of track the impact that clothing has on the environment. And t-shirts are a really big, kind of a really big problem with that. So if you're able to reuse t-shirts in any way, you totally should. So I have my sleeves cut off right now. Of course, you could just wear your shirt like this if you wanted to. But then the next step you're going to do is cut off the collar. And so again, there's a seam around the collar right here. And so we're just going to cut right underneath that seam. And basically what we're doing right now is making the handles of the bag. So you're going to, when you're done cutting off the collar, have basically two big handles for your bag. And again, if you wanted to, you could wear it like this, but we're gonna make a bag out of it. So now you see that I cut off the collar, and so I got kind of my 2 handles right here. And then the next step is the really fun one. We're gonna start on the bottom of the shirt. And so basically what we're gonna end up doing is making a sort of fringe on the bottom of the shirt. And this is really fun and easy to do. You're just gonna start on one end, and measurements don't really matter for this, but you're just going to cut a bunch of strips through both layers of the shirt. So like I've got my shirt here, I'm going to say 1.5 inches. It really does not matter. And then I'm going to cut up maybe 4 inches or so into the shirt. It really doesn't matter. This is the bottom of the shirt, and then this is my strip that I just cut. And I'm gonna do that all the way along the bottom of the shirt until I have just a bunch of different strips. So we'll work on that. And these bags are also really strong too, which is nice. I mentioned one of the things that people like about them is that in order to use reusable bags at the grocery store or even buying a tote bag or anything, the problem with that is that while you're not using plastic bags for your groceries, which is really great, you still do have to buy some sort of product in order to carry your groceries around. Obviously, you're getting a lot more use if you're using a reusable bag than if you were using just one plastic bag one time. But that bag still has to be manufactured. It still has to be shipped places. So if you're able to use materials you already have to create reusable bags, that's really an awesome solution to try and be really, really sustainable and green. So I have all of my strips cut right now. Try to turn it around so you can see. There's just strips going all the way down the bottom of the shirt. And then our last step, or our second to last step, there's gonna be a strip on either end that's gonna be the side of the shirt. So a lot of these strips you can kind of separate out. So there's two of them, but the strips on either end, there's just kind of one little bit that's folded in half. So we're going to cut down the side of the shirt so we can turn that kind of one folded strip into two. So I'll cut through there on my one side. I'll cut through there on my other side. There we go. And now I have a nice little fringe on the bottom of my shirt. And so now this is the fun bit. You're going to take this fringe and you're going to tie it off. So we're gonna have sort of a tied fringe thing at the bottom. And so this part's really easy. Basically, you'll just take two of the strips. There's gonna be one from the front of the shirt, one at the back of the shirt. They're all piled up on top of each other. You're just going to tie them together in a knot. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be fancy. And then you're gonna tie them into a knot again, just so it's double knotted and it's nice and strong. And then you're gonna go down the whole shirt and do that. So I got the next two strips. I'm gonna tie it in half, or excuse me, tie it in a knot, tie it in a knot again, and just keep going down all of the strips I have on my shirt. And this is really nice too if you have a bunch of shirts. I like just making these when I'm watching TV or when I'm listening to a podcast or whatever, and you can knock them out really, really easily, especially if you have some shirts that you like, but they're kind of like they've got holes in them, you don't want to wear them out anymore. You can turn them into reusable bags, which is really awesome. Almost done, got like 4 more strips. Got 1, 2. Didn't think you were going to be watching someone tie a shirt into knots today, did you? 1, 2. All right. Last one. All right. And so now that all of those are tied at the bottom, we've got the bottom of our bag. These bags are really, really strong and useful too. So like I use these to carry produce and all sorts of different kind of heavy stuff. And I haven't tried it with a watermelon yet, but I'm pretty sure they could carry an entire watermelon if I wanted them to. They're really, really strong and durable and punching the fists through and nothing's happening on the bottom. So you don't have to be worried about taking these to the store and losing all your groceries. These work really well and they're basically free. So that's just a little lesson in reusability for you. There's lots of other great tips out there online if you're looking for different crafts and things you can make out of stuff you have at home. But yeah, so either if you crafted along with us, hope you had a good time, or if you're going to do it later, it's really fun to do. But we've got some extra time left over at the end of the program. So now I'm thinking that we can open it up to requests. So if you guys have anything in particular you're interested in seeing on the sphere, we can pull anything up for you and talk about it. We could pull up some of the stuff about ice caps if you guys are interested in that, or we could pull up some stuff that's not really related to the program, things like if we wanted to talk about Mars or anything about animal migrations. There's over 600 different data sets, so there's lots of cool stuff they're able to do. You can just leave those in the comments if you're interested in seeing anything.
We have a request for animal migration.
Awesome. I will show you guys some animal migrations. Are there any particular animals you're interested in seeing? So we've got a whole bunch of stuff.
Okay. Butterflies and sharks and birds.
I'll pull up the bird migration first because that's one of my favorite ones.
The request is for monarchs after this.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll show monarchs right after this just because I've already got birds pulled up. So the sphere is really great for showing kind of like global patterns, like we were talking about, global systems for different things. So one in particular that the sphere is really good at showing is animal migration, actually, because that usually happens globally. So the one that we're looking at right now, this is called bird migration. And so this is looking at how birds move over the course of the year. There's a bunch of little black dots with gray lines behind them that are moving between North and South America right now. Each of those black dots represents one species of bird. So it's not one individual bird, it's kind of the center of the entire species. So you can see them flying north and south as the time of year changes. Again, we have that same coloration on the sphere too we were looking at earlier, where the middle of the sphere is kind of orangey red, and then the bottom of it tends to be blue. But this is actually measuring air temperature, not ocean temperature. So you can see here, as the air temperature starts to get colder up in North America, all of the birds fly south for the winter, and as the air temperature starts to get colder in the southern hemisphere, all the birds are going to fly north for the summer. So it's a really cool way to look at huge groups of animals and how they move. I'll pull up the butterfly one because that's another really cool one too. So the butterfly migration that we have is looking at monarchs. Oh, I'm in the wrong section. So you might not know, I'm sure that you've seen monarchs flying around your yard before, but monarchs are really, really great at migration. They have a really, really cool migration. So we'll see that right here. This data is all from a place called iNaturalist. And so basically a bunch of people, just regular folks who like butterflies, went out and took pictures of butterflies as they found them all over the world, specifically took pictures of monarchs, and then they uploaded it to a website. And so that the information from that website that just gathered from regular people was able to be put on the sphere, and it's showing the location of monarchs all throughout the year. So there's a little ticker there you guys might be able to read. It says June, July, August, November. It's going through the entire year. But so monarch butterflies have a huge migration that they take, basically starting all the way north in Canada for the most part, and then going down south to Mexico and Central America. The crazy thing about this migration is that for most birds, for instance, the birds will start off north, fly south, fly back north, maybe do it a couple of different times. Monarchs never see the end of their migration. So monarchs will start off in Canada, for instance, and then they will fly south maybe to somewhere like Michigan. They'll lay eggs, those eggs will hatch into caterpillars, those caterpillars will turn into butterflies, then those butterflies will fly a little bit further south, maybe to Kentucky, maybe to Texas. They'll lay eggs, those eggs turn into caterpillars, those caterpillars turn into butterflies. Those butterflies fly further south until eventually they get all the way down to Mexico. And it's usually 2 or 3 generations until the butterflies are able to reach Mexico. Then from there, they will have what's called a super migration. So all the butterflies in Mexico get together, they spend the winter, and then pretty much immediately they'll all start flying back north, back to their individual homes. So butterflies will fly the entire way back as far as they can go back to the original starting point. They'll lay eggs, they'll have a caterpillar, that caterpillar turns into a butterfly, and then the whole cycle starts again. So it's this really crazy thing that scientists try to understand is how can these multiple generations of butterfly that have never met each other, don't necessarily have any way to know where they're going, how are they able to have this crazy migration? And it's a really, really interesting area that people are looking at. But so next time you see a monarch, you should know that it's only stopping in your yard. It's not going to be there for very long, and it's probably in the middle of a very long journey to wherever it's headed, either back or forward. Yeah, so that's animal migration. Do you guys have any other data sets you're interested in seeing? There's lots of cool stuff. We could look at space. We could look at all sorts of different things.
How big is that sphere and how cool is it in person?
It is so big and so cool. How's that? No, it is, I believe it's about 6 feet in diameter, right at the middle, and it is so much cooler in person. The reason the museum is currently not open to the public is just because obviously everything going on with the pandemic, but also we have some ventilation issues that we're working through. But when we reopen to the public, which we're going to have a grand reopening and it's going to be wonderful, Science on a Sphere is definitely something that you need to check out. It is great to look at it through video. There's a fantastic website that you can use. That's sos.noaa.gov to see some of these data sets, but it's like nothing else in person. It's basically a giant glowing ball full of information. It's almost, it feels like you're in Star Trek, like looking at the holodeck. There's this fantastic thing, especially the fact too, when we're able to make it rotate, which I can actually do right now. It looks like the sphere is rotating behind me right now, but it's actually not. That's all just an optical illusion based on the way that the projection's working. The sphere itself is staying in place. So there's just all this really, really cool technology kind of baked into this that's able to make it something that's unlike anything you've ever seen. So definitely when we reopen, come check it out or go see it at another location. There's Science on a Spheres all over the world. So definitely it's something to see before you die. It's very, very cool. but I'm biased as well, that's my job. Yeah, any other questions?
Nothing yet. No.
Okay, that's all good. So we got just a couple of minutes, so just so you guys can kind of see the full scope too. I'm gonna pull up something from space. It's one of my favorite data sets, and it is Mars. So we'll pull up the Mars data set right here. The Mars data set is one of my favorites because honestly, this is, I mean, it's not going to be our next home, but there's definitely possibilities for us to learn a whole lot more about Mars, and it's just really, really cool, the amount of information that we do know about Mars. Humans have been on the Earth for a very long time, obviously, so we've been learning a lot about how the Earth works over our history. Still learning things every day, but we've only been able to travel to Mars for the past 50, 60 years or so to try and gather information from it. Before that, we were looking at Mars through a telescope. And so the fact that we're able to have this really cool high definition satellite imagery of another planet that's so far away from us is really, really awesome. And also, because we have so much information about Mars, Science on a Sphere has a bunch of different data sets that have really cool information about Mars. So not only do we know what Mars looks like, we also know all sorts of things like things about Earth, or Mars's magnetic map. We can look at Mars's topography. There's just all sorts of cool information that we're learning about Mars, and so it's kind of a really cool thing to look at and bring that information to you guys directly from NASA.
We do have a question. It looks very dark at the bottom. Does it get no sun there? And I believe it's just a projection issue for why it's so dark at the bottom, right?
Yes. So the reason that it is so dark at the bottom is because of the way the projectors work. So it's basically just like shining light on any ball, right? You're only going to be able to hit certain parts of it. Like even if I have my Earth right here, it's darker on the bottom than it is on the sides, just because of the way the light works. But if we were to flip it up, we could still see what's on the bottom. So I could do the same thing for Mars, for instance, where I can actually show you guys that little white spot right there is the south pole of Mars. So we're still able to see that stuff, and that area does get light, but just not quite as much probably as the rest of it. I don't know what the angle of Mars is. I don't know if you happen to know that off the top of your head, Alina. I certainly don't.
No.
But the Earth, yeah, but the Earth rotates at an angle, so the Earth doesn't just sit in space just like this. The Earth sits at an angle of 23.5 degrees. So sometimes the South Pole gets a bunch of light, sometimes the South Pole doesn't get any light. Same thing with the North Pole. I don't know.
It's 25 degrees. So that's only Mars is 25 degrees tilted. We're like 23, right?
Yeah, 23.5. So the South Pole of Mars gets a little bit more light than us, than our South Pole sometimes, a little bit less light than our South Pole sometimes. So yeah, that's a fantastic question. It's something we can explore using the sphere, which is super fun.
And then one more question. Do we have anything showing the huge fires?
The huge fires. I have not looked at this yet, so I can't say for certain, but I did promise that we would look at the live stuff, so I'll look at that.
We do have a data set that shows some fires.
Yeah.
Maybe not the most recent ones, but maybe.
Let's see. Yes, so we do have, this map is called Fires Real Time. So this is showing fires that occur all over the Earth in more or less real time. There's another little ticker down here. So this is starting off in November of 2019, and then it should show up until the present day the amount of fires that we're having. So I assume when you're talking about the big fires, it's going to be the fires in America, in California right now, and Oregon. You guys see North America on there?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will zoom in on North America a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. But so the number of fires here, the larger or the more deep red the color is, the more fires there are, and then the more yellow it is, the fewer fires there are. So we're in May right now, we're moving into June, so they should start popping up a little bit more frequently. Okay, so this data set only goes until June 10th, it looks like. Or no, there it keeps going, it's just pausing on me. Okay, so July 27th, July 28th, August 10th. Yeah, so you guys can see right there where all of the fires are starting to pop up on the West Coast. And then they're still very prevalent now, just starts in September 27th. But they're a little bit less prevalent. It looks like they're dying down a little bit. The crazy thing, though, is that we obviously are having huge fires in North America right now, and they're causing a lot of problems for a lot of people. It's a very big disaster for certain. But what's interesting is that a lot of the fires, there's also wildfires happening all over the earth. So for instance, if we look at Central America or South America, you can see that there's fires all over South America, basically all of the time. And the difference is that, for one, this area is a little bit less densely populated than North America is, so we don't hear about it that much. But also this map is looking at just fires in general. So this might be from something that it's still a wildfire, but it could be from like slash and burning the rainforest, for instance, to make cropland, or it could be from a lot of different sources as well. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting to look at those.
We have a question. So the sun and moon have been orange here in Lansing. Is that from the fires? And I believe yes. So there's the ash and smoke coming across. Right, because we have air currents as well, in addition to those ocean currents.
Okay, we don't have the map on here, but NOAA put up a really good map a couple of weeks ago, I think it was. And you can just look up like smoke map North America and it should pop up. But they showed all of the smoke coming from the fires on the West Coast and showing how it affects the rest of the United States and Canada. And it basically has covered up the entirety of North America with smoke, or at least northern North America. So yeah, when the sun and moon have been orange, I know I was driving into work, I think it was last week, and the sky was really hazy the entire day, and that was from the smoke up in the upper atmosphere that was coming from those fires. So yeah, it definitely affects the entirety of North America.
And then are there more fires now than in the past?
Yes, so that's another great question. So we don't have data necessarily going back all the way into the past, but we do have data going back as far as we've been collecting data, so several hundred years at least. I can't say for certain, just because I'm not a fire expert, whether or not there's more fires now than there are in the past, but I'm fairly certain that there are, just based off of looking at data like this and looking at a lot of other data that I've seen. It definitely seems that way, and it also makes sense that there would be based off of climate change. So the more that the climate changes, there's differences in the amount of rainfall that we get, there's going to be differences in the temperature that we have in different areas, which means that it creates hotter and drier conditions, which is more conducive to wildfires. So there's definitely more wildfires in some areas, like the West Coast, for instance. Here in Michigan, we don't usually have wildfires. I mean, we have them occasionally, but it's not like a huge thing that we usually deal with, but that's because we have a different climate. So certain areas definitely have more wildfires. Some areas might actually have less wildfires because we're getting more rainfall, but that's also due to climate change. So it really, yeah, so it's just extremes. It's not necessarily, yeah, we're gonna have wildfires all over the entire earth. It's just areas that are prone to wildfires will probably have more in the future.
And then one last question, does the smoke come down to where we breathe?
Does smoke come down where? To where we breathe?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I'm not a fire scientist, so I couldn't say for sure, but based off of what I know about the atmosphere, I'd assume some of it does, but not enough for it to be a huge issue in areas where we are, at least in the museum in Michigan.
Yeah, my sister's in Colorado, and we she's got breathing a lot more smoke than we would ever breathe.
Yeah, and so it's kind of the same thing. It's just, I mean, if you imagine, actually, I can show air currents really quick before we go. I'm looking in the wrong category again. Come on. Okay. Where's it? Okay, so this is a really cool data set. So this is showing a bunch of different things that happen in our atmosphere. It's all about atmospheric chemistry. So you can see there's some blue stuff swirling around, that's sea salt. There's some white stuff that's sulfate, that's basically like the greenhouse gases and pollutants we were talking about. But the green color is black organic carbon, which is smoke. And so you'll see the black organic carbon is spreading all across North America here from where they're coming. This is a data set from 2006, so this isn't the most updated thing. But so you can see that it spreads kind of through, but this is in the upper atmosphere. So it definitely would be more concentrated where the fires are, and then as you get further away from the fires, it gets less and less concentrated, so we'd be breathing less and less of it, is my understanding, at least. Like I said, I'm not an air scientist, I'm not a fire scientist, but yeah, that's what I would think anyway. Yeah. It looks like it is 11:59, so I think that's going to be the end of our program, but fantastic questions. We had a really, really great time. If you guys want to tune into these programs again, we're doing them every other Tuesday. So the next one that we're doing, I believe, is Life in the Deep. So talking about life hydrothermal vents. And Alina is going to be leading that one, and I will be virtual. So you guys can learn all about what sort of life happens in the deep sea. If you enjoyed this, tell your friends about them. If you know any teachers that want to tune in with their classes, feel free to let them know. These programs are free to the public. Usually we charge for them. So if you want to tune in again, get a little bit of free entertainment, free education, you can feel free to do so. It's been really fantastic hanging out with you guys. I hope you had a great time. I know I did. And again, this is Nick VanAcker from the Embassy Museum. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
All right.
All right. See you guys. Bye.